Welcome to How to Yu-Gi-Oh!
Historic Archetype, Spyral.
Chapter 1.
So in this video, I'm going to talk about Spyral, the his relevancy it's had on Yu-Gi-Oh! And how it has changed how we play Yu-Gi-Oh! In a certain way. With that being said, let's get on with the rest of the video.
Chapter 2.
And so, let's talk about it. Spyral. What has Spyral done for Yu-Gi-Oh? First of all, when we talk about Spyral, we must talk about the most important thing that it changed for Yu-Gi-Oh! Hand trap allocation.
Effects, combos, and everything broken. These are the ingredients to victory.
Before Spyrals, hand traps in Yu-Gi-Oh! Were relevant, but were usually part of the side game, right? We did play, cards such as Maxi or other cards at the time. I do not believe Ash Blossom existed, but hand traps usage was there only to be used in the side. It was not a common feature. It wasn't a common thing. However, when Spyral appeared in the competitive scene, we saw for the first time, right, the introduction of 12 hand traps in the main deck. This introduction of 12 hand traps became the standard and became the norm for Yu-Gi-Oh! Going forward in the competitive scene.
Fuck this shit. I'm getting out of here.
So it is very important that you realize Spyral's significance to hand trap allocation in Yu-Gi-Oh! It is because of Spyral that now decks play a lot of hand traps.
Facts.
It is because of Spyral that in Yu-Gi-Oh! Hand traps have become the norm and have been normalized in competitive scene. It all tracks back to Spyral.
I can't deny that. It's just the truth at this point.
Remember this well. We've had tier 0 formats before, and take into account that Pendulum was the first time that we had tier 0 format happen in Yu-Gi-Oh! History. But Spirals was the second time. And the second time it happened, it had a huge impact on the game and on players themselves, right? And it all comes down to the gimmick of Spirals, as we can see with Spyral Double Helix and Spyral Master Plan, with the ability to be able to just look at your opponent's deck, special summon, and do all manners of things. This is a deck that also, at the time, could do a U-lock, could basically lock you out of the opponent out of the X deck with the U-locking mechanic that was in the Link era at the time. So bear that in mind. We also have Spyral Drone, Spyral Resort, as you can see on that slide here, and all manners of things that could happen. But anyways, what I do want to say about this is that when it comes to Spyral, their significance to Yu-Gi-Oh! Is very important, as it showcased to us, especially in the competitive scene, that hand traps are needed. And hand traps are needed at scale and in mass. It gave a taste for the majority of the player base that hand traps should be normalized and hand traps should be part of the game. And so this is something that needs to be said and needs to be acknowledged, that Spirals brought about the normalcy of hand traps into the game, brought about the normalcy of playing 12 hand traps in the competitive scene of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think this is something a lot of players don't really talk about when it comes to Spirals. Sure, they remember about, the tier 0 nature of Spirals, but no one actually acknowledges that Spirals changed the overall landscape of Yu-Gi-Oh! For the future. It made Yu-Gi-Oh! Even harder and normalized hand traps into Yu-Gi-Oh! And made the environment of Yu-Gi-Oh! Even more inhospitable than it was before. Was Yu-Gi-Oh! A great environment in the competitive scene before Spirals? Absolutely. Were hand traps rampant? They weren't. Hand traps, you have to remember, before Spirals were introduced, were used only in the side deck. This means that we only used hand traps to deal with problematic archetypes or a problematic game that we couldn't deal with. They were not main decked. You have to take this into consideration. Okay? Hand traps were not main decked, they were side decked. So this was and the maximum amount of hand traps you were playing were what? 6 hand traps? Possibly? I believe it was 6. I don't think it was even 9. I think 6 hand traps were how much you were playing on a regular basis before Spiral's inclusion. This meant that you had a relatively easy time. Decks had a relatively easy time. The only decks that were really strong were combo decks, obviously, because they had the Omni Negates, at the time. Or really, type negation was there. Omni Negates wasn't there so much, but there's a lot of type negation, like a lot of combo decks that put type negation, one that negated monster effects, spell effects, etc., etc., etc. Except for Mechaba, which was a kind of Omni Negate, but you have to take that into consideration. So that's the deal here. That is the deal here. And that's what I've got to say about Spyral. Let's head on to the conclusion.
Final chapter.
So, we're here at the conclusion. And now, I will just conclude all I've got to say about spirals. When it comes to Spyral in Yu-Gi-Oh!, Spyral normalized 12 hand traps in our game. Spirals normalized hand trap usage and normalized big combo boards. Now, am I saying that combo boards were big at the time? Not really. Before Spirals, again, you have to take consideration, yes, we had Goki, but making big combo boards was not a common feature. It was something that unless the archetype was able to make it, or unless you could mix archetypes to make it, it wasn't something that players aspired to be doing most of the time. Why? Because, again, hand traps were not a major part of Yu-Gi-Oh! At this point. Remember, we were only playing 6 hand traps maximum in the competitive scene, so you didn't really need to make a big board. However, when the hand trap usage changed and 12 hand traps was then normalized, this now means that making big boards was now a necessity and was now something you had to do to compete in the competitive scene. And because you needed to make a bigger board to deal with more hand traps, this meant that the hand trap situation would fluctuate between 12 to 15 hand traps, usually settling around 12 hand traps. It was only when Tempai was introduced a few years later, that our hand trap situation completely went out of control. I will definitely talk about Tempai in a future historic video, how that has really ruined the hand trap scene and really normalized it to a whole new disgusting level that we're still trying to heal from to this very day. But outside of the Tempai nonsense, definitely spirals are what started the hand trap normalization in Yu-Gi-Oh! So bear that in mind. And I think that's all I've got to say about spirals and in this video. So tune in next time as I'll talk about more things on this channel. Hope to see you soon.
We come to the end of this video. So, as I like to say, you are one step closer to becoming a Yu-Gi-Oh! Master. My fate, right, is in your hands.